Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Subplot, of course, a podcast discussing a new science fiction literary work every month by casual fans just like you. I'm Stavros, and with me is someone who, rumor has it, attempted to teach chronology to high school students but got busted back to mathematics instead. Charlie.
Yeah, wait, Charlie. How long have you spent prepping these, Stavros?
Way too long. That's why I'm studying chronology too.
Okay.
Also with me is Vincent, who was possessed by a ghost long enough to get a PhD. Say hi, Vincent.
Yeah, I don't believe that, but I'm an electric monk, so I believe whatever you want me to believe.
And speaking of electric, we're also joined by John, an engineer who was left hooked up to the laws of physics and believes them all more or less at random.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% believe.
I'm glad to hear that. All right, for episode 7, we're talking about Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, written by Douglas Adams and published in 1987. All right, so going into the plot synopsis here, the book opens with a fairly humdrum character named Richard Macduff going to a fairly boring dinner at his old college that honors the English poet Samuel Coleridge. From there, things quickly spiral out of control. He meets his old college professor, Reg, who happens to own an apartment that is a time machine for some reason, gets possessed by an alien ghost, and then meets the titular detective, air quotes, Detective Dirk Gently, who manages to unwind a plot to destroy the world by said ghost alien by going back in time to visit Samuel Coleridge and distracting him. And if that sounds ridiculous, that's probably because it is. So yeah, so let's jump right into the discussion for this book.
Your Honor, what may I propose a motion? Can we call ghost alien Galian from now on? I motion to have that.
I think that will be struck from the record.
Damn it.
As will Metches.
Yeah, so
joke will never die.
But yeah, so let's start. So this is obviously supposed to be a comedy adventure Douglas Adams type thing. And I basically call the structure of this book and the entire contents of this book, wouldn't it be funny if? And I think there's no real logic to this story. There's just a series of wouldn't it be funny if scenarios. So like, hey, wouldn't it be funny if a time machine was an apartment? And wouldn't it be funny if there were ghost aliens? And wouldn't it be funny if a guy was possessed by ghost aliens? Like, how'd you guys feel about the humor style?
Are you proposing that fiction books have to have some purpose?
Maybe I am. I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, Hitchhiker's Guide is almost literally a wouldn't it be funny if for the entire, like, not the entire series, but for a large part of it, where it's just like random asides and all this sort of stuff.
That is true. I feel like here it's just there's so, one after the other nonsensicality, like, especially towards the end, where he's just, I'm not even really sure how he ended this book. It's like, wouldn't it be funny if he just annoyed a guy and saved the world? I'm not sure if I'm sold on it.
Yeah, like, I like kind of quaint British stuff, so like the whole scene at the college and him going back and the old guy being kind of forgetful and there being this weird explanation, like, I enjoyed all that, but probably the whole actual plot of it didn't click quite as much for me.
Okay, well, what do the rest of you guys think?
I think that Douglas Adams writes a lot from experience, at least from what I've heard before. So, for instance, like, I think there's a point in the book where there's a couch that's like magically unmovable and stuff like that. And I remember like looking it up and being like, oh, there actually was a college experience where he went and there was a couch that had been built into a building. Like, they moved the couch in before the building was done. And then when they tried to remove the couch, they realized it was physically impossible to move the couch. So like they were just stuck with the couch wherever they had wedged it. And so I feel like there is a lot of, wouldn't it be funny if kind of statements, but I feel like he's just like the weirdest highlights from Douglas Adams' life. Let's put them all together because we can make a story where like there's a supreme interconnectedness between all things. So let me try my darndest to make all the weird things in my life connect to each other and tell a story.
I'm really hoping Douglas Adams didn't like sneak into a girl's apartment and then claim a ghost made him do it. That'd be...
that might have happened. That might have happened.
I think I actually like the way you just described it, where it's like, I do like all the nice little interconnectedness stuff. I think it's some of the broader, overarching, like, kind of sci-fi stuff where I was like, okay, I guess that explains what's going on, but, you know, besides it creating fun situations, it was, like, especially, like, I realized I was 10 pages away from finishing the book, and I was just like, wait, like, we're just starting what seems like the climax, and the thing's gonna be done. And I know, like, at least 3 or 4 pages are gonna be dedicated to, like, shenanigans aftermath.
Yeah, there isn't like a slow burn like you often get from another. You reach the climax almost near the very end of the book. I would say I would agree. I kind of agree with that. But I kind of think the point of the book was to make these moments. I wouldn't say in a very literal sense that the book is like Chekhov's gun, but I kind of felt like most of the pieces, the big pieces that he put in the book, were vitally important, but he doesn't tell you why. You don't find out why until much later. Especially the ending. So I thought it was very good, but this wasn't a heavy sci-fi book. He doesn't go into a lot of detail about technology, but it's certainly a sci-fi in nature.
No, I definitely enjoyed it. It was fun to read, but in terms of, like, being a plot, I was kind of like, take it or leave it, but in terms of just the actually reading it, enjoying the writing, and enjoying the characters and everything like that, I'd be like, yeah, it's fun.
Okay, well, that kind of leads into the next topic, and John, I'm glad you brought that up, because we should talk if this is actually a sci-fi novel. I mean, we kind of picked it up because, you know, we all know, Hitchhiker's Guide, of course, but, a lot of this movie, like, the sci-fi elements, if you can call it that, is like the time-traveling apartment in Aliens. But a lot of this is, like, ghosts murdering people, and I don't know, it kind of feels more like a supernatural novel.
There's certainly a supernatural portion to it, but by definition, it occurs in a realm, of Earth, and there is technology that exists in the, at least in the time machine, that does not actually exist.
I feel like John's argument is it was not set in an Amish setting. There was technology, therefore science fiction.
This is science fiction.
Hey, the British Telecom is definitely mentioned here. That's technology.
Yes.
Yes, it working is science fiction, according to this book, anyway.
So what do you guys think? I mean, is this more should this be qualified as a supernatural adventure novel with kind of like an aftertaste of sci-fi?
Yeah, I'd say it's even though it's not as blatantly science fiction as Hitchhiker's Guide, it's science fiction in the same way, where a lot of it is just like, oh look, here's kind of a logical explanation of, a pseudo-fake logical explanation of, like, this is how this would work, to lead into nonsense.
Here's my point. If I were a librarian and you handed me this book and I had to put it in a section of the library, I'm pretty sure I would say this was like 80% fantasy, maybe 20% sci-fi, so it would land in fantasy in my library.
Fantasy?
I like fantasy, but supernatural I think falls into fantasy generally. I mean, maybe the ghost books do have their own paranormal kind of section, but I wouldn't classify it as paranormal either.
I mean, a lot of time is dedicated to the ghost thing, but it's pretty much just the one guy who gets murdered by the electric monk. Spoilers in case.
I think yeah.
Yeah, and then the alien ghost thing, which is the ghost of an alien who landed here billions of years ago. He is clearly an alien. That is clearly sci-fi. I figured, still, unless there's a straight up like sci-fi comedy section, probably put it in the science fiction section, or at worst, like fiction section.
At worst.
Most bookstores have the combination fantasy, supernatural, sci-fi section anyway, so
that's true.
This is definitely getting filed in there. All right. Well, going back to the plot of the book a little bit, I kind of got a weird feeling from the pacing of this book. There is a lot of time spent in setup, like that dinner at the beginning of the book. There was a lot of time spent there, and even the guy who the book is named after, Dirk Gently, the detective, doesn't even show up. I feel like it's like at least halfway through before he shows up.
It is. I counted it. Mathematically, it's past halfway.
I counted as well.
Is that the phone call, or when the professor asks about him, or is that when he actually goes to the
Isn't the phone call, I think, is the first time you talked to after when he snuck into his girlfriend's apartment?
Yeah.
Definitely not a creeper.
Yeah,
Yes.
but talking about the plot and everything like that, it's like almost the entire point of the Gordon Way story getting shot is to explain how ghosts work for the alien ghost in like the last fourth of the book. Like from a plot perspective.
This is going back to wouldn't it be like, hey, wouldn't it be funny if there were aliens that had ghosts that murder people for some reason? And that we just have to summarize the plot of this novel.
Well, ghost possessions.
Oh wow, sorry.
Doesn't murder in itself.
That is true. I guess there's androids murdering people too. Sci-fi. There's a
50%
sci-fi.
of the murders in this book occur by robots. Let's put it in perspective here.
That's a good point.
Wait, who else gets murdered?
Well, Gordon, Way gets murdered by the robot, the electric monk.
Yeah, but who else got murdered?
Michael Wynton Weeks. So when the ghost takes him over, he kills Ross, I believe his name was.
I thought Michael Wynton Weeks just gives his body over to the alien. He's just he comes back and he's like, yeah, it's cool, and then the alien takes over again.
I think he kills his boss. I think he kills his boss, and that's what allows the
That's
ghost
what I was
to
trying to remember.
control him,
That's
something
the other
like
murder.
that.
Yes.
Albert Ross, the editor of the new.
There you
Yes,
go.
that's
He
right.
kills
That's right. I was trying to remember because I was like, it sounds right, but I can't remember the other person. I was like, oh yeah, because it's like an off-page character.
Yeah, it was something that seemed kind of gratuitous, that murder, but okay.
Well, no, it made
Well,
sense. As Stavros said, it made sense in the plot, and it fit in terms of all the stuff that's like. It seems like all the shenanigans that is most of the entertainment of the book is just set up for like, oh, and this is how it actually works out and leads into the actual plot in the last 20 pages.
Yeah, to some extent, that's the book is. I'm a magician, and I'm gonna show you everything you need to know for the trick, but you're not gonna see the trick come together until the end.
Wait, did
Well, that's
M.
how I
Night
felt.
Shyamalan write this book, or did...
Yes, basically, yes.
John, is the solution to the trick time travel?
You wouldn't know that unless the child told you. Just like in the novel.
Just like in the novel.
I'm just like, that's a very randomly specific correct answer from a random child.
Charlie, wouldn't it be funny if a random child saved the world by just saying child stuff? That's the climax of this novel.
I have a child. Does that mean I'm eligible to save the world?
Ask him oddly specific questions about world-ending crises, and we'll find out.
And then she'll go, "Whee!"
Yeah, I'd like to hear
My
you
God,
guys talk
that's-
about the ending. I'd like to hear each of you try to explain the ending of this book. 'Cause I have, after talking about this, I get the impression none of you know how this book actually ends.
What? The whole thing is, he goes back in time and talks to the poet who wrote the Xanadu. What is that? The
Coleridge.
poem?
Kublai.
Kublai, yeah.
Kublai, right. But that's the one thing where I think by the end I was just like, I guess they said something.
He annoys the guy into not writing something. I think thereby breaking the chain of events that would have had the dinner in the first place. Am I totally off base?
No.
You're missing it.
It's so the ghost is apparently trying to give instructions on how to repair his Salaxian ship in the Kublai Khan poem, and what's happening is the solution in the end is apparently Gently and crew go back and they prevent the ghost from putting the solution in the Kublai Khan poem, therefore preventing the ship from ever being repaired in the first place. But somehow the ghost, even though he still has the solution in his brain, what strikes me is like, why doesn't he just go back in the past again and fix it again? Or like, it's just kind of this weird thing. But like somehow they disrupt the poem getting written, therefore the ship never gets repaired, therefore humanity is saved, and that's supposed to be the end of the book, I think. But Douglas Adams himself said that he forgot how the book was technically supposed to end under interview.
Alright, I'm gonna lay down the gauntlet for the spoilers here, because this is how the book ended for me. Alright,
let's hear it.
The ghost, which comes from the Salaxian ship, the alien, he can only move in one direction in time. So he started at the beginning of what would essentially be life on Earth, but he can only move forward. He cannot move backwards, except via the time machine at the end of the book. All right.
So you mean
like person.
you mean like literally everything else in the
Yeah.
All right, so no, well, Professor Chronitis and the rest of them are traveling in the machine. They can move to different points in the timeline. So essentially, what happens is the Kubla Khan book. He puts in information that contains instructions for fixing the ship, but he's essentially trying to influence. He's trying to influence somebody with this information because he realizes he can only possess people who generally want to do what he wants to do.
Yeah.
So he puts the instructions so that he can influence the book, and this is all so that he can get Michael Wenton Weeks, essentially, in the end, because he's the only one who...
Oh, so by changing the poem, they said it so Michael Wenton Weeks never hears the poem and can't be influenced?
That's right.
Okay.
So they send in Dirk, who annoys the author. The author never listens to the ghost, never writes that part of the book, never influences Michael Wenton Weeks, can't be taken over by Michael, so the ghost is essentially unable to go back in time.
Yeah, and then don't they destroy the ship in the past and take the music and repurpose it as Bach or something like that?
That's right.
I feel like you guys have just been reading conspiracy theories on the internet or something.
No,
No. Look, Adams himself
sense.
is like doesn't understand the ending of his own book. Like he literally there's documented evidence where he's like, yeah, I'm not really sure what I was thinking. It made sense at the time.
I will say that as a conspiracy theorist, I actually spent about 5 minutes trying to read the book backwards to see if that actually made more sense, and that didn't make more sense. But I was equally confused, I think, going forwards and backwards.
That is where I feel like I should actually read that actual poem to find the differences in the book version at the start versus the real one and see, like, oh, is that the stuff that apparently supposedly got left out or something like that when he went back in time and changed it, or I don't know.
Yeah, spoiler alert, the word Salaxian is not in that poem.
Sadly.
No, it's not. So I think if we could sum this up for the listeners here, if you're interested in understanding how this book ends or how any book that you read ends, this is not the book for you. However, there's a lot of funny moments and the characters are a lot of fun and interesting. So it's worth a read.
All right, let's actually talk about characters because Dirk Gently, the titular private detective / like sociopath guy. He's the book is named after him. Doesn't show up until halfway through, and even when he does, he's just like I kind of envision, as a unexperienced American. I kind of as someone who's seen Sherlock, I kind of envision him as like a really annoying Sherlock. Like really annoying Benedict Cumberbatch. Like if Benedict Cumberbatch didn't actually solve any crimes, it was just annoying.
I don't know why in my head, maybe I misread the book, but I just imagined him as a young Stephen Fry the whole book.
I could see that.
I had vaguely remembering that Douglas Adams was involved strongly with writing some Doctor Who episodes, and apparently this book, as well as some other things, were part of a screenplay he had written for a Doctor Who episode. I don't know if it ever got aired, or maybe it did get aired, but he repurposed it into this book. A lot of the ideas. I think if you look it up, you can find it. But I think if you think of it as a Doctor Who episode, you can kind of see that, oh yeah, you got to set up with a really weird mystery, and you've got like a mysterious Doctor Who guy with a time machine who's trying to solve some stuff, and then you arrive at some magical solution at the end, and that's the end of the episode.
So then who is Dirk Gently in this analogy? I feel like he's just like I think he even references Sherlock Holmes in there. It's like, oh, you're gonna tell me like a smudge on my shoe, like shows that I came from the past or something like that. It's just like he's just really annoying.
Yeah, he's not Doctor Who. He's Doctor What? Because you don't know what's going on.
I don't think. I mean, I'm not even really sure how smart he is. I mean, he's like a con artist kind of. He's just like a really annoying con artist.
Well, he clearly has experienced ghosts before, because the other police officer keeps saying like, all this crazy crap happens when you're here. Like, get out.
I kind of think there's an assumption that if you have to have malicious intent to be a con artist, and I kind of think he really believes that he solves crimes via interconnectedness, and that all the things around him should work out because that is the state of the universe, apparently. So I think it comes off as maybe that he's expecting it all to.
Like,
So there's a section of the book where he is like maybe conning old women who are trying to find cats and like charging them large amounts of money for going to Hawaiian Islands to try and figure out or maybe Tahitian Islands to try and figure out where the cat is. And there's definitely some like questionable stuff he was doing in the beginning when he first gets introduced to you, where you're like, he's a con artist.
Hey, quantum entanglement is real, and maybe the solution is in Tahiti. There are no hidden variables. It just makes a decision when you check the other end.
It's like math. It's like probability. Anything is technically possible. Like if you give it enough time. So it's like, okay, I can give that to you, Charlie, but it's a pretty big stretch.
Hey, don't say that because people are like, pi has every number in the world in it. It's like, no, you can have infinite non-repeating numbers without having every possible number in it, idiots.
Wow.
Sorry, excuse me.
Math anger.
Yeah, I feel like you have some math rage built up there. I'm glad you're bringing it out for this book.
Who'd have thought?
Okay, so obviously Douglas Adams is known for Hitchhiker's Guide. How does this book compare to that book? We talked a little bit about it before. I feel like, as a guy who's read all the Hitchhiker's Guide books, I feel like Hitchhiker's Guide is a little bit more sensical than this. It's more than just a combination of random plot events.
I hate to say it, I think Hitchhiker's Guide is actually more nonsensical, but it places the setting and the setup better so that makes more sense or works better, or at least feels more consistent and justified.
I can see that.
It's been a while since I read Hitchhiker, so I vaguely remember it following a character for longer periods of time rather than as a younger person when I was reading it. I followed along a little bit better. Maybe I'm like misremembering how Hitchhiker kind of went, but I remember it making a way more sense in this book, and I don't feel like I'm stupider nowadays, though it's possible since I'm older.
So, do you remember So Long and Thanks for All the Fish and Mostly Harmless? It starts...
I read them for sure.
This book reminded me a lot more of the later Hitchhiker's books than the earlier ones, but this one still felt like more lighthearted and had a little more fun stuff going on in it.
I feel like I'm watching like Don Hertzfeldt's Rejected short, where it starts out real good, and he starts writing everything with his left hand, and then the plot line devolve, and everything falls apart. Kind of like that. It's a little bit cruel, but it's not that bad. But
it's clearly laid out with a point that leads to the end, and like you said, everything's interconnected.
Yeah.
But it's just like, I don't really... It's not like Hitchhiker's Guide where they give you all these long descriptions, and then suddenly, like, 100 pages later, or like a book later, like the main character discovers how to fly when it was just like a nonsense aside earlier in the book or something like that. Or what's the guy in Hitchhiker's Guide where it turns out that he's murdered the same guy over and over and over again, and the guy has his Kill Arthur Dent form like 3 books later, and it's like this culmination of this ridiculous joke that's been going on. Like it felt like it was kind of aiming for something in that vein, but it didn't have like the comedic payoff. It was just like, I feel like I really needed to be much more into British poetry to appreciate the ending.
It's been a long time since I read Hitchhikers, but I do remember liking it enough that I read all the Hitchhikers, even though I think the first one was my favorite. This one was definitely not my favorite. This is probably my least favorite, unfortunately.
What do you think, John, compared to Hitchhiker's Guide?
This is going to be a short answer, because I have not read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
So, in your opinion, this is a book you have read.
It is infinitely better than a book I have no knowledge of.
In that case, let's go straight to our final thoughts here. Because you're not dead to us.
Hey, can we all agree it's at least better than the Hitchhiker's Guide movie?
That was a pretty bad movie, I think I remember.
Anyway, let me start off with my final thoughts. So, I mean, in general, I liked the humor. I thought like all the characters were endearing, at least. But just the pacing and the plot of the book, just from one nonsensical thing to the next, kind of threw me for a loop. But it's like the flavor of each individual bit was good, but then like the meal as a whole gave me a giant stomachache. Charlie, what do you think?
So, in general, I liked all the characters and found the humor quite endearing. But yeah, pretty much what Stavros said. Exactly that.
Good. My job here is done. How about you, John? Guy that hasn't read Hitchhiker's Guide?
I have no reference point for Hitchhiker's Guide, but I can say that this book I felt to be well written. I like the characters. I thought Dirk Gently's character was ticklingly interesting, and I thought the ending was a thinker. So be prepared to be disappointed.
I'll just add that despite whatever whining and moaning I've been doing this thing, I actually liked it a lot. I did enjoy it a lot. It's just unlike other things where I'd be like, everyone should have to read it. It's like, if it sounds like your dig, then you should read it. Otherwise, it's like, I don't know. Try it out if you feel like it or not.
Okay. How about you, Vincent?
I feel like this book is going to you're going to enjoy it depending on your mentality going into it. If you go in expecting a normal book, like you go into a Star Wars movie and you want to see Star Wars, you want to see a star or you want to see a war before halfway through the movie. Otherwise, you're going to be very disappointed.
Wow.
But if you go into this book and you're thinking of it as a puzzle, or if you're thinking as like someone who has really creative writing style and like kind of like you want to live in the dialogue and enjoy it, I think more, if I had come into this book thinking of it as a puzzle that I had to figure out, I would have enjoyed it a lot more, because I was reading the first half of the book and I was like, where's the main character? And I got so impatient that I was kind of like not paying attention to small details and this book is all about the details. It's all about how all the details finally merge and end into one big thing. And if you miss any of that because you're reading a little bit fast or you're being a little bit impatient trying to get to the main quote unquote point of the book, there's no point. Every single phrase is kind of like a point in the book. And in the end, if you solve the mystery, you're going to be very rewarded. If in the end you're like, I missed 50% of the clues, I don't understand what happened, you're going to hate the book. So it depends on your point of reference when you come in. It could be a good book. I personally didn't enjoy it that much. But there are millions of people who love this book. And so you shouldn't let Charlie or you shouldn't let Stavros and me necessarily rain or parade. There are some people who really do like this book. And it depends on who you are.
I can definitely see people really liking this book. And in fact, it's like, I'd probably pick up the sequel at some point. Okay. Because, John, don't you watch the show and you like that?
Yes. Plug for the show. The show does not follow the book. The show is separately written, and it is awesome.
It doesn't follow the book. Definitely watch it.
Definitely watch it. The same characters are there. It's hilarious.
It's got Frodo, right? Who does Frodo play in that?
Yes, it's Peter Jackson. Records the whole thing from Mount Doom in New Zealand. And it's hilarious.
Is he Dirk Gently in the TV show?
He's very gently.
Okay, good. Frodo the Dirk.
All right. Well, now that we've completely alienated all Douglas Adams fans, we're going to wrap up this episode of Subplot, of course. As usual, if you have feedback or suggestions on books we should read and discuss, you can reach us at subplotofcoursepodcast@gmail.com or on Twitter at @subplotpodcast. And for next month's episode, we are going to be talking about Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, or Blade Runner, as you might know it, by Philip K. Dick. So say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Peace.
Peace.